It's really something, isn't it? How certain words, certain bits of, well, logic, just sort of seep into how we talk about really sensitive things.
Oh, absolutely. Especially around topics like human behavior, trauma, abuse.
Exactly. And language can get outdated so fast, or worse, become offensive or just plain inaccurate. It clouds things up.
It really does. And that lack of precision isn't just confusing, it can actually be harmful, misrepresenting some really complex human experiences.
Right. So that's what this deep dive is all about. We want to cut through that confusion. Think of it as a shortcut to getting a better handle on these really emotionally charged ideas.
Mhm.
We're going to unpack some specific phrases you hear thrown around, often misused. And crucially, we'll get into the dangerous thinking behind arguments that try to deny trauma exists.
Yeah, exposing that flawed logic is key.
We've looked at the sources you sent over, pulled out the key insights to hopefully give you a much clearer picture and, help you know how to respond effectively when this stuff comes up.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, let's unpack this first one. The phrase emotionally retarded. Now, first off, this term is, well, it's incredibly outdated, it's offensive, and it's simply not a real psychological or medical definition.
Not at all. It has no clinical basis.
And it's a stark reminder, really. This isn't just about being, politically correct. It's about being precise. It helps us understand the actual struggles people face, which these old labels just hide.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How quickly that kind of imprecise language leads us down the wrong path. When we actually move past that specific harmful term, we find much better clinical alternatives, things like emotional immaturity.
Okay, so emotional immaturity. What does that actually mean in a clinical sense?
Right. So it describes an inability to manage emotions in a way that's appropriate for someone's age. You see traits like impulsivity, real difficulty with empathy.
Like understanding where someone else is coming from.
It's exactly, or even sharing their feelings.
Yeah.
Also, profound self-centeredness and significant trouble with regulating their own emotions.
So that could look like lashing out or withdrawing.
Yeah, or just getting completely overwhelmed by feelings. And crucially, you often see a pattern of blame shifting. It's always someone else's fault, and a real lack of accountability for their actions.
So if emotional immaturity isn't just acting childish, what's the biggest misunderstanding people have? How does this clinical view change things?
I think the biggest mistake is seeing it as just a character flaw, or something someone will just grow out of, a temporary phase.
Right.
But the clinical definition shows it's more foundational. It's a real difficulty in navigating relationships, handling responsibility. It's a dynamic struggle, not just a fixed state. And thinking about it that way really changes how we might approach helping someone, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests a need for development, not just judgment.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then there's another term, emotional dysregulation. This one's a bit broader, often linked to various mental health conditions.
Okay.
It specifically points to an individual's deep struggle to manage the intensity and the duration of their emotional responses. Think of it like having trouble with the volume dial on your emotions.
So reactions might be way out of proportion.
Exactly. Way out of proportion to whatever triggered them. It's a fundamental difficulty in managing that emotional level.
That distinction really clarifies things, helps understand the why behind certain actions. Okay, let's shift to another term we hear, one that carries a lot of weight. Degenerate criminal.
Ah, yes.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. How one word can just totally warp our understanding of complex actions, complex people.
It's a classic example of language hiding more than it reveals, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's judgmental, it's derogatory, it has zero basis in law or psychology. It's almost always used just to dehumanize someone.
And if we focus on being precise, we can actually talk about the behavior itself. That's much more useful than just slapping on a moral judgment that ignores the underlying issues.
So instead of degenerate criminal.
We can talk accurately about antisocial behavior. And this isn't just about one bad act, it's a pattern of disregarding and violating other people's rights.
Okay, a pattern. What does that pattern look like?
It shows up as things like a profound lack of remorse or guilt, being deceitful or manipulative, often just for personal gain. Yeah. Also, irresponsibility, impulsivity, recklessness.
Like not thinking about consequences.
At all. Plus aggression, irritability, and just a consistent disregard for laws, rules, social norms.
So it's really a whole cluster of actions and attitudes, not some fixed inherent thing about the person.
Exactly. It focuses on the observable problematic behaviors. And then just for legal clarity, you have the term criminality.
Right.
That's purely a legal term. It just means someone has committed a crime. It focuses on the act itself, the legal definition, not some sweeping dehumanizing label. Precision matters here.
It really does. And when you take that precision about antisocial behavior and combine it with what we just discussed about emotional immaturity or dysregulation, well, that's where things get quite illuminating. Because when those distinct sets of traits start showing up together in one person, it paints a very clear picture, often quite disturbing. So what does that problematic dynamic actually look like in practice?
Yeah, this raises a really important question, doesn't it? How do you even recognize this pattern? And maybe more importantly, why is it so resistant to change? Or even just acknowledging responsibility?
Good question.
When these traits come together, what you often see first is that profound lack of empathy we mentioned. Our real inability, or maybe unwillingness, to understand or share how a victim feels.
An inability or unwillingness. That's a key distinction.
It is. Then you'll see manipulative behavior, using tactics like gaslighting, deceit, all to control people and dodge accountability.
And there's often that sense of grandiosity, entitlement.
Oh, absolutely. A deep-seated belief that they're superior, which they use to basically justify hurting people.
Which seems like it would feed right into impulsivity, risk-taking.
Definitely. Acting on urges without really thinking about or maybe caring about the severe consequences. It's almost like the rules just don't apply to them.
Right.
And what can be particularly unsettling and, frankly, dangerous is their capacity for superficial charm.
The chameleon effect.
Exactly. They can seem totally normal, even likable on the surface, all while hiding that deep disregard for others. It makes their true nature incredibly hard to spot, especially for someone already vulnerable.
That's chilling. What else?
You'll often observe an emotional coldness, a callousness, a detached attitude towards other people's pain, and something very common and devastating: the tendency to blame the victim.
Projecting their own issues.
Precisely. Projecting their faults, even accusing victims of making things up, fabricating stories. And finally, you see this consistent resistance to authority, to rules, defying norms, laws, ethics, like those things are for other people, not them.
Wow. That paints a profoundly stark picture. It really connects the dots, shows how seemingly separate behaviors are often part of this really dangerous core dynamic. Okay, now let's shift to something incredibly sensitive and honestly frustrating: the harmful logic used in trauma denial.
Right, this is critical.
It's just devastating when you hear it, but really understanding why victims stay silent is so important. The argument that, a victim's silence is somehow plausible evidence that the abuse never happened. It's not just absurd, it's deeply, deeply harmful.
It is. And it's a common tactic. You hear it from abusers, from people enabling them.
And we need to be really clear. It is an irrefutable fact that victims don't always disclose abuse immediately, sometimes never.
And this is where we really need to dig in.
Yeah.
Because what looks like a lack of proof, the silence, is often one of the most powerful, chilling signs of the trauma itself.
So the silence isn't evidence against abuse.
No, it's often a profound symptom of the abuse. It turns that whole logic completely on its head. Silence isn't a void. It can be a symptom as clear as a visible injury.
Okay, so why? Why do victims of severe trauma, especially when there's coercive control involved, often stay silent?
There are so many complex reasons. First, there's often intense fear. Fear of retaliation from the abuser, or even from people who support the abuser.
That makes sense.
Then there's coercive control itself. This isn't just one threat. It's an insidious pattern. Threats, isolation, constant manipulation, psychological abuse. It systematically strips away a person's sense of self, their agency. It makes speaking out incredibly difficult, sometimes literally impossible.
Beyond those external threats, what about the internal stuff? What's the most, maybe, counterintuitive reason they stay silent?
I'd say one of the most insidious internal factors is the deep shame and guilt that abusers manipulate victims into feeling.
Making them feel responsible.
Exactly. Making them believe they're somehow to blame for what happened, or that telling someone would just cause more problems, be a burden. This often combines with a real fear of being disbelieved or invalidated.
Yeah, worrying people will minimize it or blame them all over again.
Right. Then there's trauma bonding, that confusing, unhealthy attachment that can form between a victim and an abuser because of the cycle of abuse mixed with occasional kindness or remorse. It makes leaving or speaking out incredibly hard.
That's so difficult to understand from the outside.
It really is. Some victims also stay silent to protect others' children, maybe other family members,
Yeah.
sometimes complexly, even trying to protect the abuser.
Wow.
And trauma itself can cause dissociation. That's where someone mentally or emotionally detaches from the experience.
Yeah.
It can make recalling details, even just for themselves, incredibly difficult, let alone articulating it to others.
And the abuse itself erodes their sense of self.
Profoundly. Prolonged abuse can lead to a loss of identity, a loss of voice.
Yeah.
Victims can lose their sense of who they are, their ability to even express their own reality. They feel unheard, invisible, even before they try to speak.
Okay, so knowing all that, when we encounter this awful logic, silence equals no abuse, how do we respond effectively without getting sucked into their game?
Right. Rule number one, do not engage on their terms. Trying to have a logical debate with someone using a premise that's fundamentally flawed, it's usually pointless.
Because their goal isn't truth.
Often, no. Their goal might be to gaslight you, to invalidate the victim's experience, to maintain control, not to actually find the truth. So instead, state the truth, firmly, clearly.
Like what? What could you say?
You could say something like, a victim's silence is never, ever evidence that abuse didn't happen. In fact, fear, coercive control, the deep psychological impact of trauma, those are the reasons why victims often can't or don't speak out immediately.
Direct? Clear?
And shift the focus back where it belongs, on the victim's reality. Their experience is real, whether they felt safe enough to share details or not.
And setting boundaries seems really key here, too.
Absolutely crucial. Be clear. I won't participate in discussions that deny or minimize the reality of abuse.
Yeah.
That kind of thinking is harmful, and I'm not engaging with it.
Firm boundary.
And most importantly, validate the victim if they're involved or if you're supporting them. Your main job is to believe them, support them. Create a safe space where there's no pressure to share details, just acknowledgement that their experience is valid.
That feels like the most critical piece.
It often is. And look, for yourself and for victims if they're open to it, getting professional support is huge. Therapists who specialize in trauma can offer vital strategies for coping, healing, navigating all this complexity.
Definitely. So, okay, zooming out a bit, why would someone even make that claim in the first place? Knowing how complex trauma is, why argue that silence proves anything against abuse? What are the motives?
Understanding the potential motives is so important because, like you said, it helps you see it's usually a tactic, not some genuine attempt at reasoning.
Right.
Often the main motive is gaslighting and manipulation. They want to make you doubt your own perception, invalidate the victim, control the story. They might even suggest you're delusional for being concerned, to undermine your own sense of reality.
That control motive again, how does that gaslighting show up in ways that might be hard to spot?
It can be subtle. Shifting the narrative slightly, constantly questioning the victim's memory, maybe suggesting the victim is too sensitive or imagining things, it chips away at their confidence. Very. Then there's straightforward denial and self-preservation. If the person saying this is somehow involved or enabled the abuse, denying it protects them. Protects them from accountability, guilt, maybe legal trouble.
Or maybe they just can't handle the truth.
That too. Some people are just profoundly uncomfortable with the reality of abuse. Denial lets them keep that uncomfortable truth at arm's length, maintain a false sense of safety. Then, sadly, there can just be a lack of empathy or outright callousness.
Which links back to those traits we talked about earlier, emotional immaturity, antisocial behavior.
Exactly. It can be part of that picture. An inability or unwillingness to connect with someone else's suffering.
It forms a cycle, doesn't it?
It really can. It can also simply be about power and control. Pushing their version of logic makes them feel superior, silences anyone who disagrees or challenges their narrative.
Okay. Are there less malicious reasons?
Sometimes, yes. It could stem from ignorance and just really simplistic thinking. Someone might genuinely not grasp the complexities of trauma and honestly believe, well, if something bad happened, they'd tell someone immediately. It's still harmful, but the intent might be different.
Right. Still harmful, but not intentionally manipulative, maybe.
Potentially. And finally, it can be a form of victim blaming. Whether conscious or not, it shifts the focus and responsibility away from the person who caused the harm and onto the person who experienced it.
This whole deep dive, it really underscores how vital it is to look beyond the words people use, to understand the why behind what they're saying, especially when it involves denying such painful realities. We've covered so much. The need for precise language instead of those old, harmful terms, the really dangerous mix that happens when emotional immaturity and antisocial traits combine, And maybe most importantly, decoding victim silence and seeing the harmful, often manipulative reasons behind trauma denial.
It's about getting clarity, isn't it? Seeing past the noise.
Exactly. Clarity and maybe protection too. Protecting ourselves from manipulation, protecting victims by understanding.
Yeah, this knowledge really empowers you, helps you address the core issues, instead of getting lost in misleading language or logic.
Absolutely. So here's something to think about. In a world that's often so quick to judge or just dismiss things it doesn't understand, how might really grasping these complex dynamics, the nuances of trauma, the tactics of denial, how might that empower you to better spot manipulation and offer more genuine, effective support to people who desperately need it?